Well, happy Sabbath, everyone. So, the title for this message is actually The Gifts from Our Gracious Father. So, the music that brought us in was actually quite timely, quite lovely. Now, I don't know if you've ever quite thought about life. I tend to think about life quite a bit. But really, essentially, there's two ways we acquire things, right? We get stuff, in either of two ways. The first way is things that we earn, stuff we work for, things that we make. These are things that we are owed, and they're things that we're entitled to, and actually we have a claim of right to. These things are our property, and honestly, you can do whatever you wish to these things, right? I made it, I can wreck it. That's my choice. Your paycheck, for example, things you buy, for example, things you build, for example. On the other hand, and this is kind of really what the theme of today's message is, these are things that you have not earned, things that you have not worked for, things that you haven't made, and things that you are certainly not owed, and things that you are not necessarily entitled to. These things are not your property by right. Any idea what we call these things? Gifts. These things are called gifts. Gifts are the things in life that you get that you're not entitled to, but by some process they become yours anyway. Not by anything you have done, but obviously by some other means. Now, you ought to treat gifts differently since they're not yours by right. I think that makes sense. In fact, I think that shows a sense of gratefulness and humility towards the gifts. And to view them with a certain awe, in fact, and wonder that you might not have that same viewpoint with things that you have rights to, because they've been given to you when you didn't earn it. Now, many of us have gifts in life, right? They're truly one of the most wonderful things we have, and often they're the closest to our heart. Your family, your church family, your children, your grandkids, the special things that you have been given. In fact, your life itself is an amazing gift. It really is. And one of the greatest gifts we have, of course, is salvation. Because we've all earned a death sentence, but we have been gifted salvation. So that's one of the most wonderful gifts that we've been given. So God has extended grace to us and offered us a redemption through his Son. And we in no wise earned it, nor deserve it, nor have any claim nor right to it. But because our Father loves us, he offers it willingly and freely, to the point where he would not even withhold his only Son for us. It is one of the most wonderful gifts that we have been given to us by our Father. Now, I'm trying to create a certain mindset as we progress and looking at gifts that we have been given by our gracious Father. And that we've been given, and I want us to kind of look through it through the lens of gratitude and humility, and not through the one of right and entitlement. And it's interesting how Paul in Ephesians 2, and we'll just read a couple verses, Ephesians 2, verses 7 through 9, kind of nicely frames this point. And what Paul says there, he says that in order that in the coming ages he might display the surpassing riches of his grace, demonstrated by his kindness to us in Christ Jesus. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is a gift, not by works, in fact, so no man can boast, no man can claim, no man can call that as a right. It is a gift. Our salvation is a gift and given because our Father is gracious. I absolutely love that word, gracious. He really is. Ephesians 2 verse 5 says that He made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in our trespasses. It is by grace you have been saved. Gracious, that word. It's synonymous with merciful, compassionate, kind, forgiving, lenient, forbearing, tender-hearted, and sympathetic. So I have a question for you. If your Father has extended grace to you, how should we be as his children? It's kind of interesting to think about. What should our response be in life if we have been extended this amazing grace? How should we be to others? The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 9 talks a little bit more about this and kind of frames it. So 2 Corinthians 9. And it says, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. So here's a wonderful, gracious response. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgivings to God. This service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is also overflowing in many expectations or many expressions and thanks to God. Actually cause others to be thankful to God. Because of the service by which you have proved yourselves, others will even praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession in the gospel of Christ. So there's a bit of work that goes along with this. And your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you. Because of the surpassing grace God has given you, thanks be to God for this incredible gift. So think on your life for a minute and the gifts you have been given. We should be happy to pass those things along. That same grace that we have been given and we should be humble about and very grateful for, we should pass that on. Does that not show gratitude to the Father if we do that? How else could you give God, your Father, a gift? Well, you could pass it on to his children. In fact, we might just cause others to praise our Father for sending us to help in various times of need. And that's pretty cool if you ask me. And it occurred to me, what's everyone's thoughts about regifting? Usually a bad thing, right? If you get a gift, you don't like it, you want to give it to someone else. Here is an example of you should be regifting. We've been given these gifts, and we should regift it to others. Not meant to be a joke, Kathy. So, to me, the grace of our Father is more than salvation. It's a bit broader in my view. In fact, and much more in fact. And as you take time and read the Bible and you understand his plan for us, collectively and individually, the incredible lengths that our Father has gone through for this thing called humanity, this project. So the concept of gifts for me goes well beyond the concept of grace, at least on how some people view the concept of grace, being just salvation, and that's it. But I believe it is much broader. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of a calling. A calling. We've been called. I'm sure everyone here is, or we wouldn't be sitting here, because we're definitely going against what the world teaches in some respects. So I don't know if you've ever looked up the word calling, but it means a strong urge, and I love this definition. It means a strong urge toward a particular way of life. It's a deep-rooted urge. And for us, it is a deep-rooted urge to follow our Father. That's what every bone in our body should be craving for. But not just to follow him as he would have, and he explains us to follow him. In fact, as children, we ought to adopt his ways as our own, and that's what we strive to do. That's why we read the book and we follow what we see. To believe what he tells us, to hate what he hates, and to love what he loves. Paul uses the term to become imitators. And that's, if anybody who's had children, they imitate. They imitate. And they're just learning. And that's what we ought to be doing too. So above the words used to describe calling, for me, calling is a word, and there's a definition. But for me, it's about becoming a part of his family, which is a lot more personal than just a set of instructions that I have to do. And it's about a relationship. It's becoming a son and it's becoming a daughter, a real child of your Father. I really believe that when the disciples asked Jesus how to communicate with God, they meant it. How do I connect? Because they would have seen the connection that Jesus had and no one else did. This guy knows something. Teach us. I think that's kind of the frame of mind that they must have had when they asked him. And the very first two words, our Father. That tells you, just those two words, a lot. How to connect with him, how to address him, how to communicate, how to get his attention. First two words. And honestly, I think we ought to pause on that and reflect on that. And I would have to ask everyone here, what do those first two words of that prayer mean to you? Our Father, what does it mean to you? Those first two words are actually extremely incredible, deep, and profound. And in my mind, those two words explain so much of the purpose of life, just in those two words, and what is going on planet Earth. Now, being called a son or a daughter is a gift. We haven't earned it, we have no entitlement to it, and we don't have a claim. But it is a gift. But you have been shown the amazing thing as grace and the deep love our Father has for us. Hebrews 2 and verse 10 kind of explains that quite nicely, and we'll read that. Hebrews 2 and verse 10. It's an awesome scripture, actually. In bringing many sons to glory, it was fitting for God, for whom and through whom all things exist, to make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through suffering. For the one who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are of the same family. And that's why Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers, to call each of us a son or a daughter, and we can call him Father. Now, along with your calling, we have been given spiritual gifts, personal gifts, all, without exception, all. God promises it, and we have all been given them. Now, it's a bit tricky sometimes to kind of understand what those gifts are and own up to what those gifts are, but they've all been given, and it's an important thing to understand. Why? Why is it important? Well, because God, in his grace and a part of his gift, has invested in you. He's investing. He's giving you these gifts because he's investing. And the scriptures also tell us to give an answer of the hope that is within you. That ought to be a really good response for us. We're trying to save the world sometimes, and sometimes it's just, I don't do that because I don't think it's right. I keep one particular day, Sabbath day, because this is what it says here. It's just, I have a hope. I have been given this wonderful grace. It's almost like, how on earth could you not communicate that? If you really feel important, or really feel that it's important and it's a wonderful gift and you've been given this amazing grace, then it ought to be pretty easy to just say, here's what it is. Ephesians 4, we'll turn over to there. Because Paul kind of gives us some instruction on how we ought to live, given what we've talked about so far. So Ephesians 4 and verse 1, Paul says, as a prisoner of the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling that you have received. There's a responsibility on each one of us to honor that gift that we've been given. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient and bear with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There's one body, there's one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism. One God and Father of all, who is over all, and through all, and in all. So Christ gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, the teachers. Why? To equip his people for works of service. And what's important, so the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach the unity in the faith. We're all in this together, but it's very clear here. We're all here and we're all being given different things, and the goal is so we all reach the line together. And in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining the whole measure and the fullness of Christ. Okay, so question. What are your gifts? Have you ever thought about that? What are they? You have been invested. God has invested in you. There's no question about that. So you ought to spend time thinking and praying and reading and understanding what are those gifts. And the second part is, are you using them to benefit our Father? Are you using them to benefit the family? Think in terms of this investment thing. You ought to ask and pray about it. Because if God's invested, he's expecting a return. I think that makes sense. And as our Father has invested in each of us, there's no exception. So there's expectations there. Another question for you. I kind of enjoyed thinking about this one. What does it say about you, and I'm sure we all have had experience with this, if you take a gift that someone has given you and you treat it with contempt? Have you ever seen this? Where someone has given something and it's just completely spurned. Well, what does it say about that person who would do that? Who would take a gift and just despise it? To throw a great gift away. What does it say about that person? Don't be that guy. I think, don't be that guy. The Bible is complete with many warnings for treating your calling appropriately. We ought to be doing our best to live up to it. And before you know it, your time on earth will be done. And all the time that you had to use your gifts, to respond to the investment, to make, to help people glorify your Father, and to do good things and follow the instruction in here. I mean, you only have so much time. And before you know it, it's over. And not to have done anything fruitful with your life is actually a terrible shame. It's a waste of a wonderful gift. And don't be that guy, despising your gift and treating it as unimportant. Now, we're all familiar with the Pharisees, right? Read lots and lots of stuff about Jesus' confrontation with the Pharisees and what went on there. But I'm amazed at their point of view of their calling. And I think as we began the message today, I think it kind of highlights which side of the fence they were on. The Pharisees saw their calling as a relationship earned. I have a right to this. In fact, it's not a gift. I have a national right to this. And it's not as an extension of God's grace. Partly why Jesus, I think, had certain frustrations with them time and time again. That they didn't have a concept of gift and grace and mercy and humility. They just didn't. It's all mine, and I can do what I want with it. And he really had serious issues with them. They were hard-hearted, stubborn, and not aligned with God the Father. And I really believe, I'm not passing judgment, but from what I read, I'm wondering if they understand the heart, understand God's heart. I don't think they really got that. And they certainly really didn't have a sense of gratitude and awe about their Father and about the gifts they were given. God's grace is a gift and ought to be treated as such. Now, inversely, think about the people in your life who have the attitude of being owed everything, having that sense of entitlement. It's a big issue now with our generation. But contrast that to people who really respect and really understand the concept of gifts. So I have a question. How do you suppose God views it? Now, we know Jesus' response to the publican point of view, or sorry, the Pharisee point of view. I kind of gave it away a bit. But really, the contrast between the publican and the tax collector, the Pharisee and the tax collector, is really interesting. I'm sure everyone's very, very familiar with it, but I think it's important to kind of bring it out here. In Luke 18, and Jesus was directly, this was directed to the people who were confident in their own righteousness, and in fact looked down on everyone else, as we begin in verse 9. So Jesus told this parable. He said, look, it's really dead simple. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. So the Pharisee in that society would have been, well, this is a righteous person. He's connected. He's got all this knowledge. He's got all this connection. He's just, very religious, in quotes, person. And this other one, he's a tax collector, probably cheats and probably takes bribes and all the rest of it. We're not sure about him. But the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. I'm better. I'm not like a robber. I'm not an evildoer. I'm not an adulterer, or even like this guy, the tax collector. And in fact, I fast twice in a week, and everything I have, I give a tenth. But I love the tax collector's response. He wouldn't even go to the temple. He stood at a distance. And he wouldn't even look up to heaven even. And he beat his breast and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus' response probably took this whole crowd, probably would surprise them. Because he said, this man, rather than the one who's connected and all well-to-do, and he said, the tax collector went home justified before God. And for all those who exalt themselves, you're going to be humbled. And for those who humble yourselves, you will be exalted. The Pharisees really believed that they could claim a right. But they failed to see our Father's grace. Now, God used Ezekiel as an example and a warning to Israel. And there's a lesson in Ezekiel 16. And I'd like to just read through probably maybe a third of it. And I would just like to kind of go through so we can formulate in our mind. Ezekiel 16. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, confront Jerusalem with her detestable practices and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says to Jerusalem. Your ancestry and birth were in the land of the Canaanites, and your father was an Amorite, and your mother a Hittite. And on the day you were born, your cord was not even cut. You weren't even washed with water to make you clean, nor were you rubbed with salt or wrapped in cloths. You were born, and you were just abandoned. No one looked on you with pity, nor had compassion to do any of these things for you. Rather, you were thrown into an open field. For on the day you were born, you were despised. Then I passed by, and I saw you kicking around in your own blood. And as you lay there in your own blood, I said, you're going to live. I made you grow like a plant in the field, and you grew up and developed and became the most beautiful. You became the most beautiful of jewels. Your hair grew, and then verse 8. Later I passed by, and when I looked at you, and I saw that you were old enough to love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. And I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you. We have a deal. I'm showing you grace, declares the sovereign Lord. And you became mine. I bathed you with water and washed the blood from you and put ointment on you. I took care of you. I clothed you with an embroidered dress and put leather sandals on you, and I dressed you in fine linen and covered you with costly garments. I adorn you with jewelry, and I put bracelets on your arms, a necklace around your neck, and I put a ring on your nose, earrings on your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. So you were adorned with gold and silver, your clothes of fine linen and costly fabric and embroidered cloth. Your food was fine flour, honey, and olive oil. You became very beautiful and rose to be a queen. And your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, because of the splendor that I had given you. This made your beauty perfect, declares the sovereign Lord. But you trusted in your beauty and used your fame to become a prostitute. You lavished your favors on anyone who passed by, and your beauty became his. You took some of your garments to make gaudy high places, and there you carried on your prostitution. Such things should not happen, nor should they ever occur. You took the fine jewelry I gave you, and the jewelry made of my gold and silver, and you made for yourself idols, and engaged in prostitution with them. And you took the embroidered clothes and put them on them. And you offered my oil and incense before them. Also the food I provided you, the fine flour, the olive oil, the honey I gave you to eat, you offered as fragrant incense before them. That's what has happened, says the sovereign Lord. And you even took your sons and your daughters, whom you bore to me, and you sacrificed them as food to the idols. Was your prostitution not enough? You slaughtered my children and sacrificed them to idols. And in all your detestable practices and your prostitution, you did not remember the days of your youth, when you were naked and bare and kicking about in your own blood. What an awful woman. What a terrible woman. This woman had nothing, zero, nothing. In fact, would have perished, would have died, no one would have given even a second thought. She was shown much grace and given much, including life. She would have died. What a way to treat the person who gave her this life, who showed her this grace, who gave her these gifts. In fact, it's a flagrant contempt for the grace she was given, for the blessings that she was given. And what a horrible way to act. She didn't just ignore the grace. She threw it away. She had contempt for it. She walked on it. She trampled it underfoot. What's the problem here? The problem is this story is not about a woman. It's how Israel was treating their father. Now, it's really easy to see the lesson when viewed from the story from Ezekiel regarding this particular woman and her sins and her grievous. They were grievous and completely obvious. The hard part is sometimes to see that in our own lives. That's the tricky part. Don't be that girl. Don't be that wife. So, to conclude, take a look at your life and the gifts that you have been given. Be grateful for them. Cherish them. Develop them. Use them. Share them. Why? To glorify your Father in heaven and to be a blessing to others. You know, you have been given many things, many amazing things, and spiritual gifts are just a part of it. Salvation is certainly a very big part of it. This whole life, this experience that we have. And look around you. And my question to you now is, how will you cherish them? How will you use these gifts? And for me, the best gifts are those homemade. Thoughts of appreciation or time spent. Because they are the gifts from the heart. Your goal is to understand how to give your Father in heaven gifts from your heart.